The field tent buzzed with nervous energy. Maps were spread across a worn wooden table. Radios crackled with urgent voices, and the scent of dust mixed with sweat filled the air. She sat quietly near the edge, her fingers tapping a steady rhythm against her clipboard. Everyone called her support staff, a title that made her feel invisible. They didn't see her as a leader. Not yet. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was racing. She was watching, waiting, preparing. Outside, the distant sounds of gunfire echoed across the rugged landscape. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Around her, soldiers paced, their faces tight with worry and exhaustion. Commanders barked orders, but the lines of communication were already fraying. The radios buzzed with static and fragmented messages. A small group of officers leaned over the maps, debating fiercely about troop movements, but no consensus was reached. The uncertainty was palpable. She watched every detail, every hesitation, every whispered doubt. Her hands instinctively moved over the maps, tracing possible routes, identifying weak points. She knew this terrain better than most. For months, she had studied every inch, every strategy. She was the backbone of this command post, even if no one admitted it. The label of support staff was a shield for others to underestimate her. But she was ready for when that shield would shatter. A young soldier brushed past her, his eyes wild with fear. "The front line is breaking," he said, voice shaking. Panic rippled through the tent. Phones rang, radios squawked, and the noise grew louder, almost unbearable. The commanders were scattered, some consulting hastily scribbled notes, others frantically calling out orders. No one seemed to have a plan. Chaos was creeping in. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to stand. Her legs felt unsteady for a moment, but she steadied her breath. She could not let fear take hold, not now. The men and women around her needed direction, even if they didn't know it yet. "Listen up," she called out, her voice rising over the din. "We need to stabilize the situation. Hold your positions and report any movements immediately." Some heads turned sharply in her direction. Whispers floated through the tent. "Who does she think she is?" But she ignored the skepticism. She took a deep breath and moved to the radio, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "This is Lieutenant Carson," she said clearly, using the rank she'd earned, but no one remembered. "Status report from all units. Hold the line until further instructions." The radio buzzed with fragmented replies. She juggled the incoming information, piecing together the battlefield's shifting picture. She called out coordinates, giving clear, precise orders that cut through the confusion. Reinforce the eastern flank. Evacuate the wounded near checkpoint Delta. We cannot lose that position. Her voice was calm, but firm, like an anchor in a storm. Slowly, the energy in the tent began to change. The chaos didn't vanish, but it shifted. Soldiers began moving with purpose. The officers who had doubted her now looked toward her for guidance. She caught their eyes, some wary, some surprised, and met their gaze without hesitation. She wasn't asking for permission. She was taking command. The radios crackled again. A soldier's voice broke through, strained and urgent. "Lieutenant, the enemy is advancing faster than we anticipated. We need support now." Her heart hammered, but she refused to show panic. "Hold your ground. Support is on the way. Keep your position. We're not losing this fight." Her words were a lifeline, a promise they could believe in. Minutes felt like hours as she coordinated the defense. The tent no longer felt like a place of doubt, but a command center humming with determination. Every decision mattered. Every order could save lives. She pushed aside the weight of expectations and focused on one thing: keeping her people alive. As the first reinforcements approached, the tension in the tent didn't ease completely, but hope flickered. She looked around at the faces, tired, scared, but resolute. They had rallied behind her. The woman they had called support staff was no longer just a bystander in the fight. She was a force to be reckoned with. And the battle was far from over. The sudden explosion ripped through the quiet tension like thunder. Dust and debris filled the air as the ground shook beneath them. The field tent, once a place of frantic but controlled chaos, was thrown into pure panic. Commanders collapsed, some injured, others disoriented. Soldiers froze, their faces pale, eyes wide with shock. The radios sputtered with broken transmissions, calls for help, confusion, desperate cries. In the middle of it all, she stood, heart pounding but mind razor sharp. Her training kicked in immediately. The men who had dismissed her just moments ago now looked to her for direction, because she didn't hesitate. "Hold your positions," she shouted over the roar. "Keep calm and stay in formation." Her voice was firm, demanding, but there was no room for doubt. Every second counted. Lives depended on it. She rushed to the radio, fingers flying over the dials as she struggled to bring the channels into focus. Static filled her ears, but she pushed through, searching for any sign of reinforcements or troop locations. "Command, this is Lieutenant Carson," she said clearly. "We're under heavy attack. Need immediate support at Grid 47B. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced it steady. She couldn't afford to falter, not now. Around her, the chaos threatened to spiral out of control. A young soldier stumbled into the tent, clutching a bleeding arm, his breath ragged. "We're losing the east flank," he gasped. She glanced quickly at the map. The position was critical. If it fell, the entire camp would be exposed. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat and made a quick decision. Divert all available units to reinforce the east. "Prioritize the wounded and secure evacuation routes," she ordered. "We're not letting them through." Her commands cut through the noise, slicing the confusion into order. Soldiers snapped to attention, moving swiftly, following her lead. Some officers exchanged uneasy glances, whispering doubts about her authority. But she ignored them. In the heat of battle, actions spoke louder than words. She had the knowledge, the presence of mind, and the courage to lead. The radios crackled again, this time with more coherent responses. "Lieutenant, we're deploying units now," came a voice. "Hold tight." Her eyes darted back to the maps, scanning every detail. Every soldier, every vehicle, every obstacle mattered. She calculated risks, weighed possibilities, and adjusted strategies in real time. Her calm under fire was magnetic, pulling the soldiers together when panic threatened to tear them apart. Suddenly, another explosion rocked the camp, closer this time. The tent shook violently. Dust swirled in the air, choking the breath from everyone inside. She steadied herself, unwilling to show any sign of fear. "Brace yourselves. Stay sharp," she commanded. A medic rushed past her, eyes wide with urgency. "We have multiple casualties. We need triage stations set up now," she called out. She nodded briskly and relayed the order. "Set up triage near the supply tents. Keep the paths clear." The hours stretched on, every moment a battle within a battle. Fatigue gnawed at the edges of her mind, but she refused to let it break her focus. Each order she gave was a thread holding the fraying defense together. She saw soldiers falter and then rally, inspired by her unwavering confidence. Outside, the enemy pushed harder, relentless and brutal. The camp's defenses were stretched thin, but her strategies held. The soldiers fought with renewed strength, bolstered by her presence. She became their beacon amid the chaos, a symbol that surrender was not an option. As night began to fall, The radio buzzed with the welcome news of reinforcements approaching. Relief washed over the tent like a wave. The battle was far from over, but hope flickered in the darkness. Her voice softened just a little as she spoke over the radio. Hold on. Support is almost here. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself a brief glance around the tent. Faces that had been etched with fear now held something new. Trust, respect, maybe even awe. The woman once called support staff had taken command, and in doing so, had changed everything. Her voice cut through the chaos like a sharp blade. The tent, filled moments ago with confusion and fear, now leaned in to listen. "This is Lieutenant Carson," she announced firmly into the radio. "Focus your fire on the northeast ridge. We need to hold that ground at all costs." The crackle of static responded with scattered acknowledgments. She didn't wait for approval. She took control, commanding with the authority no one had expected her to have. Around her, soldiers moved with renewed purpose. The men who had doubted her moments before now followed her orders without question. She quickly relayed positions, reassigning units to cover vulnerable spots. "Alpha Squad, flank left. Bravo, hold your line and prepare for counterattack." Her tone was steady but urgent. There was no room for hesitation. Her hands moved over the maps with practiced precision. Each mark represented lives, futures, and the fragile hope of survival. The radios crackled incessantly with updates, some good, many bad. She absorbed every piece of information, weaving it into a strategy that balanced risk with necessity. "Lieutenant," a voice interrupted. "Enemy forces are regrouping near Sector Charlie. They're preparing for another push." She narrowed her eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing down harder. "We won't let them break through. Call for artillery support on their position. We buy time for our men to regroup." She paused, listening carefully to the static-laden reply. "Copy that, Lieutenant. Artillery will strike in 5 minutes." She exhaled slowly, knowing those minutes could be the difference between life and death. Suddenly, the tent shook as a distant explosion echoed nearby. Dust fell from the ceiling, and some soldiers flinched. She looked around at the faces illuminated by harsh lights. Fear, exhaustion, but also a fierce determination. She found strength in their eyes, and that strength fueled her own resolve. Her radio crackled again. "Lieutenant Carson, Bravo Squad is pinned down. Ammunition running low." Her mind raced. "Send immediate resupply. Use the southwest corridor. Keep them covered." She didn't wait for questions. There was no time for doubts or second-guessing. Minutes later, a young soldier burst into the tent, sweat glistening on his brow. "Lieutenant, we need evacuation routes cleared for the wounded." She nodded sharply. "Direct all medics to set up triage at the northern compound. Clear paths for transport vehicles. Lives depend on speed." Her orders sparked a flurry of movement. Soldiers worked faster, sharper, their fear replaced by trust. The tide was turning, but the battle was far from over. Every second was a fragile thread holding together the fragile hope of survival. She glanced at a small photo taped to her clipboard, a reminder of why she fought. Family, waiting for her to come home. The thought steeled her nerves. No matter the chaos, no matter the fear, she would not fail them. The radios buzzed again, the sound of artillery fire roaring in the distance. The enemy's assault was fierce, but her leadership was fiercer. Her voice remained calm, clear, unwavering. "Hold your ground. Support is on the way. We fight together." In that tent, amid the crackling radios and shifting maps, a transformation had taken place. The woman once dismissed as support staff had become the heart of the defense, the commander they needed when no one else could lead. Her gaze met those of the soldiers around her. In their eyes, she saw a reflection of her own determination, a promise that they would survive this night together. And as the battle raged on outside, inside the tent, hope burned brighter than ever did. Whispers started to ripple through the tent, low and uncertain. "Who is she to give orders?" one officer muttered under his breath. Another shook his head, lips tight. Doubt hung heavy in the stale air. They had never seen her like this, calm, commanding, decisive. The woman they'd called support staff was no longer just a background figure. She was directing the battle. She heard the whispers, but didn't let them distract her. Instead, she focused on the radios, the maps, and the faces looking to her for guidance. Each decision she made now carried the weight of lives. Some officers exchanged doubtful glances, but she knew one thing. The battlefield wasn't a place for hesitation or old prejudices. "Lieutenant, we need a status update on the eastern perimeter." A voice crackled through the radio. She scanned the map and replied without hesitation. "Eastern flank is holding but vulnerable. Reinforcements are en route. We can't afford any gaps." Her tone left no room for argument. She was commanding not just with rank, but with the authority earned through action. One officer, older and grizzled, approached her quietly. His eyes narrowed. "You're stepping on toes," he said, voice low but firm. "This isn't your fight." She met his gaze evenly, refusing to back down. "This is everyone's fight," she replied. "And right now it needs a clear head and quick decisions." Her words hung in the air, challenging and true. The old guard wasn't used to being questioned, especially by someone they had dismissed. But the minutes passed, and with each one, her steady presence proved more valuable than doubt. Soldiers responded to her orders with precision, pushing back the enemy's advances. In the background, radios continued to buzz with urgent reports. "Lieutenant Carson, supply lines are disrupted," a soldier reported. Her jaw tightened. Without supplies, their defense would crumble. "Redirect all available transport vehicles to secure the southern route," she ordered. "We can't lose contact with command." Her voice was firm, a lifeline in the storm. Despite the tension, she took a moment to assess her own feelings. Fear lingered beneath the surface, but she refused to let it show. Her calm was a shield, for herself and for those depending on her. Each breath was measured, deliberate. She drew strength from the faces around her, the exhausted, the wounded, the determined. Suddenly, a young officer interrupted, urgency in his voice. "Lieutenant, enemy forces are regrouping faster than expected. They're massing for another attack." She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but stayed grounded. "Prepare countermeasures. Use the artillery to disrupt their formation before they reach our lines." Her strategy was clear, and her voice carried the weight of command. The old officer watched silently as she gave order after order. Slowly, his skepticism softened. He saw the results, soldiers moving with renewed purpose, the enemy pushed back, the chaos controlled. Leadership wasn't about age or title. It was about courage under pressure. More radios chirped. "Lieutenant Carson, the wounded are being evacuated. Morale is holding." She allowed herself a brief nod of approval. It wasn't victory yet, but the tide was turning. The tent, once filled with doubt, now pulsed with determination. She had earned her place here not by rank or status, but by standing tall when it mattered most. Her gaze swept across the room, landing on a young soldier clutching his rifle tightly. His eyes met hers, filled with silent gratitude and trust. In that moment, she realized something profound. Leadership was never about being seen. It was about being ready when the moment called. The whispers had faded. Doubt had given way to respect. The woman once dismissed as support staff, had become the steady hand in the storm, the commander no one expected, but everyone needed. And as the battle raged outside, inside the tent, a quiet revolution had taken hold. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. Outside, the rumble of distant explosions shook the ground beneath the tent. Inside, the tension was nearly unbearable, but she held her ground like a pillar of steel. The soldiers looked to her now, their eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and hope. The woman they once ignored had become the heart of their defense. Her fingers traced the worn map, eyes scanning every detail with unwavering focus. "Enemy forces are regrouping faster than expected," she said quietly but firmly. "We cannot let them gain any momentum." Her voice carried the weight of command, steady and unyielding. A young radio operator interrupted, breathless. "Lieutenant, the supply lines are cut off. We've lost contact with the southern convoy." The words hit her like a punch, but she didn't flinch. "Understood. Divert all available units to secure the northern route." "We'll have to adapt," she said without hesitation. She knew the risk. Without supplies, their position would become impossible to hold. But surrender was not an option. Not now. Not ever. Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder. The enemy was relentless, pushing harder with every passing minute. But inside the tent, her calm was contagious. Soldiers straightened, movements becoming sharper, decisions faster. She was their anchor in a storm that threatened to tear them apart. A soldier rushed in, carrying a wounded comrade. Blood stained his uniform, but his eyes shone with determination. "Lieutenant, we need more medics. Casualties are mounting." Her heart ached, but she pushed the pain aside. "Set up triage near the East supply tents. Send all available medical staff immediately." Her orders sparked action. Even in the chaos, the camp began to move with purpose. The wounded were cared for, supplies rerouted, defenses reinforced. Every decision she made was a lifeline thrown to those on the edge. The radios crackled again. "Lieutenant Carson, artillery support is delayed. Enemy reinforcements are closing in." She clenched her jaw. The delay could cost them dearly. "Hold the line at all costs," she commanded. "We will not break." A hush fell over the tent. The soldiers absorbed her words, the weight of their situation pressing down hard. But the fear was tempered by a fierce resolve. They were fighting not just for survival, but for each other, and for the woman who refused to give up. Minutes dragged like hours. She felt the exhaustion creeping in, but she refused to show it. Her mind raced ahead, calculating every possibility, every risk. She thought of her family, waiting somewhere far from this chaos. The thought steeled her nerves, fueling her determination to keep fighting. Then, a crackling voice broke through the radio static. "Lieutenant Carson, reinforcements have arrived. ETA 5 minutes." Relief washed over her like a wave. The battle was far from over, but hope had arrived with those words. She turned to the soldiers, eyes burning with quiet fire. "Hold your positions. Support is coming. We fight together." Her voice was softer now, but no less powerful. The tent seemed to breathe again, the tension easing just slightly. Faces that had been marked by fear now held a flicker of hope. They trusted her. They believed in her. Outside, the battle raged on. But inside, the woman they once called support staff stood tall, no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. She had taken command when no one else could. And in that moment, she was their leader, their hope, their unbreakable shield. The first rays of dawn filtered through the tattered canvas of the field tent, casting a pale light on the worn faces gathered inside. Outside, the distant rumble of battle had faded into an uneasy silence. The soldiers were exhausted, bodies aching, minds worn thin, but they were alive. And that was because of her. She leaned over the maps again, her eyes sharp despite the sleepless night. The enemy had retreated for now, but the fight was far from over. The perimeter was fragile, the supply lines still unstable. Every detail mattered. Every decision could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the lines of their defenses, but her voice did not waver. "We'll use this lull to reinforce our positions and resupply," she told the officers. "Set up patrols along the eastern ridge and secure the supply routes immediately. We can't let the enemy regroup and strike again." The men and women around her nodded, exhaustion etched into their features, but their trust was evident. They had seen her in the worst moments, under fire, in chaos, and she had never faltered. Now, as the calm settled, that trust deepened. Suddenly, a radio crackled to life, the voice urgent and shaky. "Lieutenant Carson, we've spotted movement near the western approach. Enemy scouts, possibly probing for weaknesses." She straightened, heart pounding anew. "Alert all units. Double the patrols on the western flank. Prepare for an attack at first sign." Her orders sparked immediate action. Soldiers grabbed their gear, weapons ready, eyes scanning the dark horizon. She moved among them, offering brief words of encouragement. "Stay sharp. We hold together." Despite the fatigue threatening to drag her down, she pushed forward. The burden of leadership was heavy, but it was hers now. The weight of every life in that camp rested on her shoulders, and she would carry it without complaint. Her thoughts flickered briefly to the officers who had doubted her, the whispers that had once filled this tent. She felt no bitterness, only a quiet satisfaction. She had earned their respect not through rank, but through courage, clarity, and relentless determination. A medic approached, his face pale but resolute. "Lieutenant, we've stabilized the wounded, but supplies are critically low. We need more before the next assault." She nodded, biting back a sigh. "Send word to command. We can't hold without resupply. Meanwhile, ration what we have carefully." The hours dragged on, filled with tension and small victories. Patrols reported no enemy activity, but the unease lingered like a shadow. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound kept nerves on edge. But through it all, she remained the calm center, a steady hand guiding a fragile hope. As midday approached, she allowed herself a brief moment to rest, rubbing tired eyes and taking a deep breath. The camp was quiet now, but she knew it was the silence before the storm. Suddenly, the radio burst to life again. "Lieutenant Carson, incoming convoy spotted, ETA 10 minutes. Relief rippled through the tent. Supplies, reinforcements, the lifeline they desperately needed." She stood tall, voice steady as ever. "Prepare to receive the convoy. Coordinate security and unloading. We move quickly." The soldiers responded with renewed energy, rallying around her leadership. In that moment, she was more than the woman they had called support staff. She was their commander, their shield, their hope. The convoy rolled in, dust rising as trucks rumbled to a halt. Men and women jumped from vehicles, carrying crates of ammunition, food, medical supplies. The camp stirred to life, the tide shifting in their favor. She watched the scene unfold, heart swelling with pride and determination. The battle was far from over, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next. And in that quiet field tent, surrounded by maps and radios, the woman who had taken command stood unyielding, a beacon of strength in a world of chaos. The convoy's arrival was a turning point, but the battle was far from over. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows over the battered camp. Every face was tired, every body aching. Yet, The fire in their eyes burned brighter than ever. They had survived the worst, and now they had the means to fight back. She stood near the entrance of the tent, issuing orders with precision. Unload quickly but safely. Prioritize ammunition and medical supplies. We need every bit to hold our ground tonight. Her voice was firm but calm, the voice of someone who had earned respect through sheer grit and determination. The soldiers responded immediately, moving with purpose and urgency. Crates were hauled out, checked, and distributed. Medics set up triage stations with renewed energy. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, oil, and hope. Outside, scouts reported enemy movements growing more aggressive. The lull had ended. The enemy was preparing for another assault, this time heavier and more desperate. Her jaw tightened. There was no room for mistakes. She gathered her officers around the map again, tracing the lines of their defenses. "They're massing forces near the southern ridge," she said. "We expect a full-scale attack before midnight. We need to be ready." One of the older officers, once skeptical of her leadership, spoke quietly. "You've done well, Lieutenant. We'll follow your lead." The acknowledgement wasn't lost on her. It was a silent victory, a testament to the strength she had shown. She nodded, her focus unshaken. "Good. Assign snipers to the ridge. Artillery on standby. We'll use every advantage we have." The radio buzzed with new reports. "Lieutenant Carson, enemy patrols spotted closer than expected. They're trying to flank us from the east." She straightened immediately. "Divert units to intercept. No openings allowed." The camp sprang into action, soldiers racing to their positions, weapons ready. She moved among them, her presence steadying nerves and sharpening focus. They looked to her not just for orders, but for the courage to face what was coming. As night fell, the first shots rang out, sharp, echoing through the darkness. The battle reignited with brutal intensity. Explosions rocked the ground. Shouts and commands mixed with the relentless staccato of gunfire. She stayed inside the tent, directing the defense like a conductor leading a symphony of chaos. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained clear and commanding. "Hold the line. Snipers cover the ridge. Artillery fire at will." Every command was a lifeline thrown to those fighting on the front. Minutes stretched into hours. The enemy pressed harder, but the camp held firm. Soldiers inspired by her leadership fought with a fierce determination. Her orders were precise, her decision swift. Suddenly, the radio crackled with an urgent message. "Lieutenant, the eastern flank is faltering. We need backup." She didn't hesitate. "Send reinforcements immediately. Use reserve units. We cannot lose that position." Her calm in the eye of the storm was a beacon to those in the dark. Every soldier she led knew that retreat was not an option. The battle was brutal, exhausting, but her presence gave them hope. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon. The enemy, battered and broken, began to withdraw. The camp had survived. They had won for now. She collapsed into a chair, body trembling with exhaustion. Around her, soldiers tended to the wounded, cleaned weapons, and prepared for whatever came next. Her mind raced ahead, already planning, already ready. The woman once called support staff had not only taken command, she had saved lives and changed the course of the battle. And as the sun rose on a battered but unbroken camp, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The sun was fully risen now, casting a pale light over the battered camp. Silence had returned, heavy but not peaceful. The ground was scarred, tents torn, and faces weary beyond words. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a new sense of something harder to define. Respect, maybe even hope. She stood outside the tent, surveying the scene. Soldiers moved slowly, tending to wounds, cleaning weapons, and checking equipment. Some cast glances her way, nodding quietly, a silent thank you for the strength she had shown. Her own body ached, every muscle protesting after hours without rest. But she felt no relief yet. The battle was over, but the war was not. Her mind raced ahead, thinking of reinforcements, of reports she still needed to send, of the families waiting for their loved ones to come home. Footsteps approached. The older officer who had doubted her stepped forward, his face more lined than before, but his eyes steady. "Lieutenant," he began, voice low but clear, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him, surprised but steady. "You earned every word of respect, sir." His lips pressed into a thin line, then a nod. "No one could have led us better." It was a moment she had dreamed of but never expected to come so soon. The woman once dismissed as support staff had not only taken command, she had changed the course of their fight and their lives. As she turned back to the camp, her thoughts drifted to the faces of those she had led. The young soldier who had rushed in with the wounded, the medics who worked tirelessly, the men who had doubted her but now followed without question. Each one was a thread in the fragile fabric of survival they had woven together. A radio crackled, breaking the silence. She answered quickly, her voice calm and clear. "Report. Command is sending reinforcements. Relief forces will arrive within 48 hours. They commend your leadership, Lieutenant Carson." Relief and pride swelled inside her, but she kept her expression neutral. There was still work to be done, orders to give, lives to protect. The camp began to stir with renewed energy. Supplies were counted, plans made to fortify their position. She moved through the soldiers, offering quiet words of encouragement. Her presence was no longer questioned. It was relied upon. Later, as the sun climbed higher, she allowed herself a brief moment alone. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the small photo taped to her clipboard, the faces of her family smiling back at her. The reason she had fought, the reason she had led. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not from weakness, but from the weight of it all, the fear, the hope, the loss, and the unwavering determination to carry on. She folded the photo carefully and tucked it away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But she was ready, because she was no longer just support staff. She was a commander, a leader, a survivor. And her story was just beginning.